How do Uber and Lyft accident claims work when you are a passenger in one of these ride-sharing vehicles? We're going to talk today about that question, and we're going to tackle it from two different perspectives. It depends on who's at fault for some of the situations that we're going to go through. So we're going to go through when the Uber or Lyft driver is at fault for the wreck and when another vehicle is the one that's at fault for the wreck. And what we're going to talk about are the two main issues in these types of claims. That is, first, the insurance availability. You need to know exactly how, depending on which of those two situations you have, how the insurance will layer, meaning how many different policies are available and how those all interact with each other. And then the second is the evidence that is unique in an Uber Lyft case, or potentially unique in an Uber Lyft case. So we will go through that as well, given both scenarios. Hi, I'm Ted Spalding. I am a personal injury trial lawyer. I've been practicing now for almost 2 decades here in the state of Georgia. And I'm not here to sell you anything, sell you my services of any kind, anything like that. I am here hoping to bring some value where I can give you some of my insight from 20 years of doing this, where you can be a better informed personal injury client for an attorney, or to be able to handle one of these types of claims on your own. I hope this video centering around Uber and Lyft is going to be very helpful for you in that process. So let's dive right in. So let's talk about the first big topic, which is insurance availability. Now, this is where the two ways someone's at fault matters. Is it the Uber Lyft driver that's at fault, or is it a third-party vehicle that's at fault? How does that then work? So let's go through both of those when it comes to insurance availability. So here's the first scenario. Let's say another driver, not your Uber Lyft driver that you're a passenger in, is the at-fault party for the collision. How does this work? Well, first and foremost, it's traditional in the sense of it's the insurance for the at-fault party first that must compensate you up to their limit. So that's what's called the liability limit. So that's number one. Then we turn to what's called coverage. Now, this is where it gets tricky, and it depends on your state's particular laws. What applies next? In Georgia, oftentimes, it is first your personal It follows you no matter what vehicle you're in. So let's say you've got a Honda Accord sitting in the house, but you took Uber because you wanted to go to the airport, didn't want to pay for parking. I do that all the time. I'm sure a lot of people do. Get in a wreck, other parties at fault, not the Uber driver. Your coverage, if you have it on your Honda Accord, is going to come next. And then it depends, and I've got other videos that go through this, then what type of coverage. There's two types in Georgia, probably most likely those similar types in your state. So that's the next policy. Then after that, it is the Uber or Lyft auto coverage How much do they have? And so you have to unpack all of that. Now, with Uber and Lyft, they've been changing some of this, especially Uber, as they've bounced from different insurance companies. They used to have Allstate do all of it. Then it was, I think now it's Farmers. Before that, it was another one. And they've changed over the course what they cover and don't cover and that sort of thing. One of the things you got to look at, depending on when this occurs, is do they still have a system of elevating how much coverage they provide depending on whether you were in the middle of a ride or not? That probably won't apply in a passenger situation. So you should be okay there, because naturally you're in the car driving. You have paid for that service, and so all of the coverage that they have will apply. So that comes second. So you've got 3 layers, okay, at least 3 layers of insurance coverage in that scenario. And of course, there's other available policies. I go in that in another video. That doesn't change given the fact that it's an Uber or a Lyft accident. So that's what happens when the other party is at fault, not your Uber Lyft driver. Now, how does it change with the Uber Lyft driver being at fault? So you're a passenger in the vehicle that's at fault. So your first claim is against Uber or Lyft. that changes things and potentially significantly in a couple of ways. So number one, the liability policy now is the Uber Lyft liability policy. They're the at-fault party. It was their employee basically that caused you injury. What comes in that scenario? Well, you got to look to, did you sign off through the app any sort of arbitration clause? That may come up. Won't get into a ton of that right now, but that means if you get to a point where you have to file a lawsuit, you may have to go into arbitration versus have a jury tell you what your case is worth against Lyft. But that's for another video. You'll want to look into that. So you got Uber Lyft, that's the first one. Then it's your on your vehicle. Again, with a scenario, you've got a Honda Civic or Accord at home. Then your applies. That's it. You have two policies. The good news is the liability policy for Uber and Lyft are normally $1 million. Okay, so you've got plenty of coverage there, hopefully, in your scenario, just on the liability side, where in the other example, it's oftentimes a person, not a company. They may only have $25,000 of coverage or $50,000. So it's a little bit of a different situation. So smaller number of policies, but obviously probably a bigger amount of coverage in the second scenario than the first. So you jump through all those hoops on insurance coverage first and foremost. That's unique here when you have an Uber Lyft situation. It's oftentimes why it is good to have an attorney, because they can ensure that every single policy is looked at. Very, very important. And then you got the secondary issues of evidence that is out there, somewhat traditional, somewhat not in an Uber Lyft case. Number one, you always want to have the police come out. Be very careful with this. I've got a recent case where this has come up, and I've seen it from time to time. When you're a passenger, you're obviously oftentimes not involved in that initial conversation between the two drivers, right? You're not one of the drivers, so you're not talking with the other driver, exchanging insurance information, talking about calling the police, that sort of thing. What I recommend that passengers do, because you don't know if they've called or not, especially if they're not in the vehicle with you at the time, right after the wreck occurs, if they're out there talking to the other driver, you don't know what's going on. Call the police. If they've already done it, once you tell them where you're at, what happened, they'll say, okay, we've gotten a number of calls on that. You want to ensure as a passenger that that officer comes out to the scene, because they will then determine who's at fault, which, as we just talked about, could be a very big determination given how much insurance would be available between the Uber Lyft driver being at fault and a third party being at fault. So that's number one. Number two, there might be cameras that normally you wouldn't have in other vehicles. And what I mean by that is oftentimes these Uber Lyft drivers have their phone or a dash cam for this specific reason. Sometimes it's just pointing back to cover them with their exchange with you as a passenger. Still important video, because it'll show how you interacted at the time of the collision. Oftentimes they have dash cam pointing out to prove who's at fault. We've gotten that evidence a number of times in these cases. You typically don't have that in an ordinary non-Uber Lyft accident between two people. They don't have that information. So really, really big source. Is there any video from the driver that he either has set up in the cab or through his phone, through an app or something like that? The other is, what if any in-app surveillance, in essence, was Uber or Lyft doing? A lot of these platforms now, they track the driver's speed, braking, maneuvering, those sorts of things, how often they're touching the screen, that sort of stuff. You want to know, is that what happens? For instance, Amazon, their in-app delivery app for drivers monitors all of that while the app is active. So you want to know, you want to make sure Uber Lyft preserves that kind of information. And then finally, it's proof that you were in the vehicle. For you to be able to have insurance apply, you got to prove you were actually there. Again, it's why first and foremost you want the police to come out, because they'll put you in as a passenger and which vehicle you were in. Otherwise, you also want to make sure you have saved any of your interaction in setting up the ride, paying for the ride. You want to prove you were a paying customer at the time of the wreck. So you want to preserve all of that information in your screen after the wreck, so you know it's there. You don't want to rely on Uber or Lyft to have that information. Get all of that. Those are unique pieces of evidence that you don't normally need or have in a normal car wreck case. So I hope this video helps you understand a little bit of the nuances in having an Uber Lyft claim when you're a passenger and are suffering from an accident. Thank you for watching the video. I've got a number of other videos on these similar topics and others. Please check those out and comment below any questions or comments on this video. Thank you so much.